Right now, something inside your skull is doing something we have never confirmed anywhere else in the known universe. It is thinking about itself. You did not decide to be aware of your own awareness just now. It simply happened. The way it always happens. Quietly and without permission. The organ doing this weighs less than 3 pounds. It has the consistency of soft butter. It looks, to anyone who has never been told what it is, like something unremarkable. And it was never meant to do any of this. It was built to keep a body alive, to detect danger fast enough to matter, to find food, avoid predators, navigate a world that was trying, at every moment, to end the life it was running, everything else, every thought you have ever had, every person you have ever loved, every question that has kept you awake at 3 a.m, came later, unplanned, unrequested, the consequence of a survival machine that ran long enough and grew complex enough that it began, somewhere along the way, to wonder about itself. This is the story of how that happened. It does not begin with a brain. It begins with a problem so old it predates everything you would recognize as life. And the solution to that problem, arrived at slowly, over hundreds of millions of years of death and accident and blind pressure, is the reason you are here right now, reading these words, aware that you are reading them. Picture an ocean with no color, not dark blue, not the deep black of the trenches you have seen in photographs. No color at all, because there is no eye anywhere in the world to receive it. The sun exists. Light reaches the surface of the water, but nothing alive can process that light into anything resembling sight. The world is full of light, and it is, in every meaningful sense, unseen. This is Earth. 3.5 billion years ago. The ocean is not empty. It teems, invisibly, with life. Bacteria, mostly. Single cells drifting in the dark, pulling nutrients from the water, dividing, surviving. They have no brain, no nervous system, no awareness of any kind. And yet they are not blind to the world around them. A single bacterium can sense the chemistry of the water it moves through. It detects the presence of food and drifts toward it. It detects the presence of toxins and moves away. It senses light, heat, the electrical charge of its immediate environment. It responds to all of these things with behavior that, if you saw it in a larger creature, you would call purposeful. It is not purposeful. There is no purpose here. No intention. No experience of wanting anything. It is chemistry producing outcomes that look, from the outside, like choice. But the outcome matters, because the outcome is survival. And this is where the story of the brain actually begins. Not with neurons. Not with thought. Not with anything you would recognize as mind. It begins with a problem so basic it is easy to miss. The world is constantly changing around a living thing. Temperature rises and falls. Food appears and disappears. Danger arrives without warning. A living thing that cannot detect those changes, cannot respond to them quickly enough. These, not eventually, immediately. Single cells solve this with chemistry. Proteins embedded in their outer membranes that change shape when they encountered certain molecules, triggering responses inside the cell. No brain required. No wiring. Just the right molecules in the right configuration, doing the right thing at the right moment. And for a very long time, this was enough. Then, in 2010, a team of researchers in Japan did something strange. They built a model of the greater Tokyo metropolitan area out of agar gel, a nutrient that a particular kind of organism can eat, and they placed food sources at the locations of the major train stations. Then they introduced that organism and watched what happened over the next 26 hours. The organism is called Physarum polycephalum. It is a slime mold. It has no brain, no neuron, no nervous system of any kind. It is, by any biological measure, one of the simplest living things on Earth. Over those 26 hours, the slime mold explored the model. It sent tendrils of itself outward in every direction, testing paths, abandoning dead ends, reinforcing routes that connected food sources efficiently. And when the researchers compared the network it had built to the actual Tokyo rail system, what they found should not have been possible. The slime mold had produced a network with many of the same properties as one of the most sophisticated transportation systems on Earth. The same efficiency, the same redundancy, the same elegant logic of connection. It did not understand Tokyo. There was no understanding happening anywhere in that experiment. What happened was simpler and, in some ways, more remarkable. A creature with no brain at all, following only the rules of chemistry and survival, produced behavior complex enough to surprise people who had spent their careers studying intelligence. This matters for one reason. It tells you what intelligence is actually for. It is not for understanding the world. It is not for art or language or philosophy or any of the things that make human life feel distinctly human. It is for surviving long enough to pass on whatever made it possible. Everything else, every higher function, every capacity that separates you from that slime mold, is a later addition, an improvisation built on top of a system that was, at its core, only ever trying to stay alive. But the slime mold took 26 hours to find its answer. In the world that was coming, 26 hours was a death sentence. The threats were getting faster. The predators were getting smarter. And life was about to discover that the gap between detecting danger and responding to it was the difference between everything and nothing. Chemistry was no longer going to be enough. On the morning of October 8, 1871, a fire started in a barn on the southwest side of Chicago. By the next morning, more than 17,000 buildings had burned to the ground. 300 people were dead. 100,000 were homeless. The fire had jumped the Chicago River twice, consumed entire neighborhoods before anyone on the other side knew it was coming. And by the time it was finally stopped by rain 2 days later, it had burned through 4 square miles of the most densely built city in America. The fire did not spread because Chicago lacked firefighters. It spread because Chicago lacked communication. By the time word reached the fire station on the north side that the south side was burning, the fire had already crossed the river. By the time the mayor understood the full scale of what was happening, entire districts had already been lost. The city had all the resources it needed to fight the fire. What it did not have was a way to know, fast enough, what was happening, where. Now imagine that city is not a city. Imagine it is a body. This is the problem that life ran into roughly 600 million years ago, when single cells began doing something they had never done before. Instead of drifting apart after dividing, they stayed together. They clustered. They began, slowly, and without any intention behind it, to become organisms. A single cell is complete in a way that a body is not. Its entire surface touches the world. Every signal from the environment arrives immediately. There is no inside that is cut off from the outside. No part of the cell that has to wait for information. But a body made of millions of cells is something else entirely. The cells on the surface feel the cold water. They detect the approaching predator. They sense the chemical signature of food nearby. The cells, 3 layers deep, feel none of it. They are walled off from the world by their neighbors. And if the cells on the outside need the cells on the inside to do something, to contract a muscle, to pull the whole organism away from danger, they need a way to send that message before whatever is happening outside has already decided the outcome. The first solutions were slow. Chemical signals released by one cell and picked up by another could carry information across a body. The way a messenger on foot could carry news across a city. But chemistry diffuses. It spreads in all directions, weakens with distance, takes time to travel, even a few millimeters. For a small organism in a world without fast predators, this was enough. Then the world got faster. What life found, under the pressure of that faster world, was a cell unlike anything that had existed before. Not a muscle cell, not a skin cell, not a cell designed to digest or protect or reproduce. A cell designed to do one thing only: carry a signal. We call these cells neurons today, though the earliest versions were far simpler than the ones running through your brain right now. What made them remarkable was not their complexity but their speed. A neuron does not send a chemical signal that has to diffuse slowly through tissue. It sends an electrical signal, a rapid change in the charge across its membrane that travels down the length of the cell in milliseconds and triggers a release at the other end that passes the message to the next cell in line. The difference in speed is not modest. Chemical signals in tissue travel micrometers per second. An electrical signal in a neuron travels meters per second. In the context of a body trying to respond to a world that was getting faster and more dangerous, that difference was everything. Your hand touches something hot. Somewhere in the neurons of your hand, a signal fires. That signal does not go to every cell in your body. It goes to specific places, in a specific order, triggering a muscle contraction that pulls your hand away before you have consciously registered that anything happened. By the time you feel the pain, your hand is already moving. By the time you think the word hot, the danger is already past. The fire in Chicago spread because the city had no way to know what was happening fast enough to respond. The neuron solved the same problem for a living body. It made it possible for one part of a complex organism to know, almost instantly, what was happening somewhere else entirely. That was not the beginning of thought. It was the beginning of speed. And speed, in the world that was coming, was going to mean everything. Off the coast of northern Australia, in water warm enough to wade through, there lives a jellyfish that has killed people within minutes of contact. It is called Chironex fleckeri, the box jellyfish. Its tentacles carry one of the most potent venoms in the natural world, a toxin that attacks the heart, the skin, and the nervous system simultaneously. It is not a passive drifter. It hunts. It navigates around obstacles. It pursues prey. It has 24 eyes arranged in clusters around the bell of its body, eyes with lenses and retinas sophisticated enough to detect color and form. Sophisticated enough that researchers who study them have compared them, in certain respects, to human eyes. It has no brain, not a simple brain, not a primitive brain, not something we have not yet identified. No brain at all, no central processing organ of any kind. The box jellyfish operates on something called a nerve net, a diffuse web of neurons spread throughout its body, connected to each other, but with no single point of command. No headquarters where information comes together and decisions get made. And yet it hunts. It navigates. It kills. Sit with that for a moment. One of the most venomous creatures on Earth. An active predator with sophisticated eyes, capable of behavior complex enough to have surprised every researcher who has studied it closely. Runs on a nervous system with no center, no leader, no authority. Every part of the organism sensing and responding. No part more important than any other. This is the first nervous system that evolution ever produced. Not a brain, a net. The nerve net of a jellyfish can coordinate the rhythmic contractions that propel it through the water. It can trigger the firing of the microscopic harpoons in the tentacles that inject venom into prey. It can detect light, chemicals, pressure, and gravity, and generate appropriate responses to all of them simultaneously, without any central organ sorting through the inputs and issuing instructions. It does this because the neurons in the net are connected in patterns. Circuits shaped over hundreds of millions of years into pathways that work. When the right input arrives, the right output follows, not because anything decided it should, because the circuit is built that way. You still have a version of this in your body right now. The network of neurons embedded in the walls of your gut, what researchers sometimes call the second brain, contains somewhere around 100 million neurons and can coordinate the complex muscular contractions of digestion entirely on its own, without any input from the brain in your skull. When you feel something in your gut, when a decision feels wrong in a way you cannot articulate, you are feeling an ancient system that predates conscious thought by hundreds of millions of years, doing what it has always done, paying attention to the world and sending signals upward. Now here is where the story of the first nervous system gets genuinely strange. For most of the history of biology, scientists assumed the nervous system evolved once, that some common ancestor of all animals with neurons developed the first nerve cells, and everything since then descended from that original invention. It was a reasonable assumption. Evolution tends to conserve what works. But over the last 2 decades, a body of evidence has grown around a group of animals called ctenophores, or comb jellies, that has made some researchers question that assumption. Comb jellies are among the oldest animals in the fossil record. They have neurons. They have something resembling a nervous system. But when researchers began comparing the molecular details of comb jelly neurons to the neurons of every other animal, they found something unexpected. The chemistry was different. The neurotransmitters were different. The genetic toolkit used to build those neurons was different in ways that are difficult to explain if all nervous systems descended from a single common ancestor. Some researchers have proposed that the nervous system may have evolved more than once. That comb jellies developed theirs independently. A separate solution arrived at by a different path. For the same ancient problem, this is still debated. Genuinely debated. Among scientists who have spent careers on this question, with evidence on multiple sides and no settled conclusion. What that debate reveals is something worth holding on to. The nervous system is not a fluke that happened once and got lucky. It is a solution to a problem so fundamental, so inescapable for any creature trying to survive in a complex and changing world, that life may have arrived at it more than once, by different routes, using different chemistry. The problem, as always, was the same. How does a body know what is happening around it before it is too late? The nerve net answered that question for hundreds of millions of years. For creatures in relatively stable environments, without fast predators, without the need for rapid coordination across large, complex bodies, it was more than enough. But something was coming that would make the slow, distributed, leaderless net look like a communication system built for a different planet. Something was coming that saw. For the first 3 billion years of life on Earth, the ocean operated in a kind of permanent fog. Not a fog you could see, because nothing could see. A fog of proximity, without the ability to detect anything at meaningful distance. No creature could hunt another creature deliberately. You consumed what drifted into contact with you, what you bumped into by accident, what your chemical sensors picked up close enough to reach before it moved away. The large did not have a decisive advantage over the small. The fast did not have a decisive advantage over the slow. Everyone was working in the same darkness, by the same rules, with the same limitations. Then, roughly 540 million years ago, one creature opened something that functioned as a true eye, not a patch of light-sensitive cells that could tell brightness from shadow. Something more, a structure with a lens, a retina that could organize incoming light into information about shape, distance, movement across space. For the first time in the history of life, a creature could see the world as a world. What happened next was not gradual. Imagine you have been playing a card game in a dark room your entire life. Everyone is playing blind, reaching across the table, guessing, surviving on luck and proximity. Then someone turns on a light, but only at your end of the table. You can see every card in front of you, every card in the hands of the players nearest to you, the expressions on their faces. They can see nothing they could not see before. That is what happened in the Cambrian Ocean 540 million years ago. We have fossils of this moment. Anomalocaris, one of the apex predators of those seas, had compound eyes that researchers who studied them described as among the most sophisticated visual systems of the entire Cambrian period. Eyes capable of forming detailed images, capable of tracking movement, capable of identifying a target at a distance that would have been, to every other creature in that ocean, effectively infinite. Before eyes, a small, soft-bodied creature moving through the water had a chance. The predator had to find it by chemical trace, by accidental contact, by the slow arithmetic of proximity. There was time. Not much, but some. After eyes, that time was gone. The predator saw you from across the water column and came for you before any signal you possessed could tell you danger was approaching. Your chemical sensors were useless. Your ability to detect pressure changes in the water was useless. By the time anything in your existing nervous system registered the threat, the question of whether you lived or died had already been answered. The only thing that could save you was something you did not yet have. A nervous system fast enough to detect what your existing senses could not. Integrate that information before the threat arrived, and send the right signals to the right muscles in the fraction of a second between detection and contact. The Cambrian period is sometimes called the Cambrian explosion, and the name fits in a specific sense. Within a geologically short span of time, most of the major animal body plans that have ever existed appeared in the fossil record. Heads, eyes, shells, claws, jointed limbs, the basic architectural vocabulary of animal life, much of which is still in use today, emerged with a speed that has fascinated scientists for generations. This did not happen for a single reason. Researchers point to rising oxygen levels, changes in ocean chemistry, shifts in ecological relationships, changes in the genetic toolkit available for building bodies. The Cambrian explosion was not a simple story with one cause, but among those causes, the emergence of image-forming eyes sits in a category of its own, because eyes did not simply give one creature an advantage. They created a pressure on every other creature that was immediate, total, and inescapable. See or be eaten. Detect or disappear. React in time or do not react at all. What followed was the first arms race in the history of animal life. Prey developed harder shells, better camouflage, faster escape reflexes. Predators developed better eyes, stronger grasping appendages, faster acceleration, and driving all of it, shaping every adaptation on both sides, was the nervous system. Because every shell, every claw, every fin was only as useful as the system that deployed it in time. There is a structure in your brainstem called the superior colliculus. It is ancient. It receives direct input from your eyes and can generate rapid orienting responses. The reflexive turn of your head towards sudden movement. Before your visual cortex has had time to process what you are looking at, it is doing what Cambrian nervous systems were doing, taking in signals, cutting out the time required for full conscious processing, generating a response fast enough to matter. You do not control this. When something moves suddenly at the edge of your vision, your head turns before you decide to turn it. That reflex was shaped by predators in an ancient ocean. It has been running in the descendants of those Cambrian animals for 500 million years. It is running in you right now. The brain is not, at its core, a thinking organ. It is a timing organ. It exists to make the right thing happen at the right moment. Before the moment passes, everything else, every layer of complexity added in the hundreds of millions of years between the Cambrian and this moment, was built on the answer to that first and most urgent question. Can you react before it is too late? You are driving on a highway at night. The road ahead is empty. Music is playing. You are thinking about something unrelated to driving, the way you always are on long, familiar roads. When something steps into your headlights from the right shoulder, you do not decide to brake. Your foot is already moving before the word deer has formed anywhere in your mind. Your hands have already begun adjusting the wheel. Your body has acted, completely and correctly. And only then does the rest of you catch up and supply the story of what just happened. There was a deer. You braked. You are safe. People who describe this experience almost always say the same thing. It happened so fast. I just reacted. I did not even think. That is not a figure of speech. That is an accurate description of what happened inside your skull. Your visual system detected the deer and sent signals in two directions at once. One pathway went to your visual cortex, the region at the back of your brain that builds the full, conscious experience of what you are seeing. That process takes time, a fraction of a second. But time, the other pathway, went somewhere older. A small, almond-shaped structure buried deep in the temporal lobe called the amygdala. One important node in a wider network that the brain uses to detect, prioritize, and respond to possible threat. This network does not wait for the visual cortex to finish its work. It receives a rougher, faster signal, enough to register that something large and unexpected has appeared in your path, and it acts on that signal before the picture is complete. The stress hormones are already releasing. The muscles are already tensing. The foot is already moving toward the brake. By the time you consciously see the deer, your body has been responding for what feels, from the inside, like no time at all. This is the oldest feature the brain ever built. Think back to the Cambrian. Think about what a prey animal needed in that world. It needed to respond to a predator, not after identifying it, not after running a full threat assessment and concluding that, yes, The large thing moving toward it at speed constitutes a danger. It needed to respond before any of that. A system that could act on incomplete information. Because incomplete information processed in time was worth infinitely more than complete information processed too late. That system is still in you. It has been in every vertebrate animal that has ever lived. Because every vertebrate animal that has ever lived has needed to respond to threats faster than conscious thought allows. Fish have versions of it. Reptiles have versions of it. The basic architecture, the fast route from sensory input to physical response, has been conserved across 500 million years of evolution because it works. And here is where it gets personal. The threat network in your brain does not reliably distinguish between a predator in your headlights and an email from your boss sitting unread in your inbox. The physiological response to the deer, heart rate climbing, breath shortening, muscles tensing, is the same machinery that activates when you lie awake at 2 a.m. turning over a conversation you had yesterday. Not because your brain is broken, because that machinery was built for a world where every threat was physical and immediate. And the appropriate response was always physical and immediate. In the environment where this system evolved, there was no such thing as a threat that existed only in your imagination. If your threat network fired, something was trying to kill you. Running the response was always the right move. Better a false alarm than a missed predator. In the world most people reading this actually inhabit, the same system fires for deadlines, for social conflicts, for uncertain futures, for all the things that feel dangerous without being physically dangerous. And because the system does not come with an off switch for imaginary threats, it runs. And when it cannot find a physical response that resolves the danger, it keeps running. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw or a failure of will. It is a 500 million year old survival system operating in a context it was never designed for. But here is what that account leaves out, and what matters most for understanding where the brain went from here. Fear is not only a response, it is a builder. Every new layer of sophistication added to the nervous system over the hundreds of millions of years after the Cambrian was shaped, in part by the pressure of fear, the need to detect threats earlier, from farther away, with less information, the need to remember which environments were dangerous and which were safe, the need to distinguish between threats that required fleeing and threats that could be stood down, the need, eventually, to model the minds of other creatures well enough to predict what they would do before they did it. Every one of those needs drove the development of something new in the brain. New circuits, new capacities, new layers built on top of older ones. The way floors are built on a foundation that was poured first and will outlast everything above it. That foundation is still down there, under everything else your brain has become. When you feel it working, when the heart rate climbs and the breath shortens and the sense of danger arrives before you can name what you are afraid of, you are not broken. You are ancient. You are running the same basic machinery that kept your ancestors alive through things you cannot imagine. In a world that has changed so fast that the machinery has not had time to catch up, it kept them alive long enough to have children, who had children, who had children, until eventually one of them is sitting here right now, reading about the system that made all of it possible. Hold your hand up in front of your face with your right thumb extended, like you are giving a thumbs up. Close your left eye. Focus your right eye on your thumb. Now, slowly move your thumb to the right, keeping your eye focused straight ahead, until your thumb is about 2 hand widths to the right of where you are looking. At some point, your thumb will disappear, not because it moved behind anything, Not because the light changed. Your thumb is still there, exactly where it was. And if you move it slightly in any direction, it will reappear. What happened is that your thumb passed through a region of your visual field where your eye has no photoreceptors at all. The spot where the optic nerve connects to the back of your retina contains no cells capable of detecting light. Anything that falls on that spot is simply not registered. But you did not see a hole. You saw, in that spot, whatever was behind your thumb, the wall, the sky, whatever surface your thumb was held against. Your brain looked at the gap in the incoming information, looked at what surrounded the gap, made its best estimate of what should be there, and inserted that estimate into your conscious experience so smoothly that you have almost certainly gone your entire life without noticing it was happening. This is not a quirk. This is the whole system, in miniature. Your brain does not receive the world and display it the way a camera displays what its lens captures. Your brain receives fragments, samples, partial information gathered by imperfect sensors operating under physical constraints, always slightly delayed, always incomplete. What it does with those fragments is build a model, a working version of the world that is coherent and stable and detailed enough to act on, filling in what the sensors missed with its best guess about what should be there. The model is almost always good enough. It has to be. You are reading these words, navigating a physical environment, making decisions based on what your senses are telling you. And for the purposes of daily survival, the model your brain is building right now is accurate enough to serve you well. But it is still a model, a construction, something your brain made, not something the world handed you directly. Researchers who study this call it predictive processing. The idea that your brain is not passively waiting for sensory information to arrive and then deciding what to do with it. Your brain is constantly generating predictions about what it expects to experience next, comparing those predictions to the incoming signals, and updating only when the signals and the predictions do not match. This has an evolutionary logic that goes straight back to the Cambrian. Waiting for complete information before responding meant waiting too long. The nervous system that could act on a prediction, that could generate a response based on what was most likely happening rather than waiting for certainty, was the nervous system that survived. The blind spot is the simplest version of this logic. Your brain predicts that the region of your visual field corresponding to the gap looks like what surrounds it, because that is almost always true, and it fills in accordingly. You never get a signal telling you the prediction was wrong, so you never notice. But the same process runs through everything you perceive, all the time. When you walk into a kitchen that smells like coffee, you probably see the coffee maker before you have visually located it, because your brain predicted it would be there. When someone begins a familiar sentence, you know how it ends before it ends. When you hear a piece of music you know well, you experience the notes slightly before they arrive. Prediction, running ahead of reality, making your experience of the world faster and smoother than the raw incoming data could ever support. And sometimes, the prediction is wrong. This is where it gets interesting, because a system built on prediction is a system that can be fooled in ways that reveal exactly how the system works. Look at a photograph of two squares, one on a dark background and one on a light background. The square on the dark background looks lighter. The square on the light background looks darker. Show someone the actual measurements and prove to them that both squares are identical shades of gray. They will believe you and still see what they saw before. The experience does not change when the knowledge changes, because the prediction system operates below the level of conscious knowledge. It does not take correction from your rational mind. It runs on its own rules. by its own logic, and delivers the result to your conscious experience as finished product. Consider memory. Most people think of memory as something like a recording, an event that happened and was stored and can be retrieved intact. Memory does not work that way. Every time you remember something, your brain reassembles it from fragments, filling gaps with prediction and expectation, shaped by everything that has happened since the original event. The memory you retrieve is your brain's current best model of the event, influenced by who you are now, not only who you were then. This is why two honest people can witness the same accident and remember different cars, different speeds, different sequences. Neither is lying. Both are remembering the model their brain built in real time. And those models were not identical. Considérez déjà vu. That uncanny sense that you have been somewhere before, that this moment has already happened. One account of this experience, supported by experimental work, is that it occurs when the brain's prediction system and its familiarity detection system become briefly out of sync. The prediction system generates an expectation of familiarity before the familiarity system has verified whether familiarity is actually warranted. The result is the experience of recognition attached to nothing recognizable. A seam in the model, visible for a moment, before the systems resynchronize. What all of this points to is something that is genuinely difficult to absorb, even when you understand it. The world you experience, the room you are sitting in, the light coming through the window, the feel of whatever surface you are resting on, is a construction. Your brain built it from incomplete incoming signals, filled in the gaps with prediction, and presented the result to your conscious mind as direct experience of reality. It does not feel constructed. It feels like the world, because that is what the system was built to produce. The brain that builds this model was not trying to give you truth. It was trying to give you something useful. A picture of the world accurate enough to act on, fast enough to act on in time, stable enough to navigate without constant recalibration. It does this extraordinarily well, most of the time, for most purposes, but it gets things wrong in ways that are systematic, predictable, and invisible from the inside. And the most important thing it gets wrong is also the most forgivable. It mistakes the model for the territory. It does not feel like prediction. It feels like reality. The filled-in blind spot does not feel filled in. The reconstructed memory does not feel reconstructed. The optical illusion does not look like an illusion, even after you know it is one. Everything feels like direct experience, like the world as it actually is. Because that, after 400 million years of refinement, is exactly what the system was built to make you feel. In 1953, a 27-year-old man named Henry Molaison went into surgery at Hartford Hospital in Connecticut. And when he woke up, something was gone that he would never get back. Henry had epileptic seizures so severe they had made it nearly impossible for him to function. The surgeon removed a structure called the hippocampus from both sides of his brain, along with surrounding tissue in the medial temporal lobes, believing this was where the seizures originated. The surgery worked. The seizures became manageable. But Henry Molaison woke up unable to form new memories of events. He retained everything from before the surgery: his personality, his language, his knowledge of the world as it had existed up to that morning. He could hold a conversation, recognize people he had known for years, tell the same jokes he had always told. But anything that happened after he woke up from that operation could not be held. A doctor who spent an hour with him left the room and returned 5 minutes later was a complete stranger. A piece of news, shared with him and mentioned again an hour later, was news he had never heard. He lived this way for 55 years. His case would become the most studied in the history of neuroscience. Researchers who worked with him refer to him in the scientific literature as H.M. His identity protected even after his death, what he gave to the science of memory, without ever choosing to, was a window into something fundamental about how the brain works. Memory, it turned out, was not one thing. Before Henry, scientists largely assumed memory was a single system. Something happened. The brain stored it. The brain retrieved it. Henry broke that assumption completely. Here is what he could not do. He could not remember any event that happened after his surgery. Ask him what he had for breakfast and he had no idea. Ask him what year it was, and he would guess somewhere around 1953, because that was where his timeline ended. Ask him the name of the doctor he had been talking to every day for 20 years, and he would look at her with genuine warmth and no recognition. Here is what he could do. Researchers taught him a task that required learning to draw while watching his hand reflected in a mirror. A disorienting exercise that takes most people several sessions to master. Henry improved at this task, exactly as a person with intact memory would. His hand grew steadier, his lines more accurate. His speed increased across multiple sessions. But each session, when the researchers brought him back to the table and placed the mirror in front of him, he had no memory of having done it before, no memory of the learning, and yet his hands knew what to do. What this revealed was that the brain stores different kinds of memory using different systems that can be damaged independently. The memory of events, of what happened and when and where, depends heavily on the hippocampus and surrounding structures. The memory of skills, of how to do things with your body, depends on other structures entirely. Structures that Henry's surgery left intact. He had lost the what and when and where. He had not lost the how. This distinction matters far beyond its neurological details. It points to something about why memory exists at all. The memory of events is a map. It tells you where you have been, what happened there, what the consequences were. It is the system that lets you remember that the path along the eastern edge of the valley led to where the predators sheltered last winter, and to avoid it this winter without having to learn that lesson again with your life. It is the system that lets you remember which berries made you sick, which faces belong to people who have helped you and which to people who have not, which sounds in the dark preceded danger and which did not. Before memory like this existed, animals had to relearn every lesson with each encounter. After it, the past became a resource, a tool, something that changed the odds of the future. The memory of skills serves a different purpose. A hunter who has spent years tracking animals does not consciously think through each step of moving quietly through undergrowth. It runs below deliberate control, faster and more reliably than deliberate control could manage. The skill has been transferred through repetition into circuits that operate without conscious supervision. Automaticity is speed. And in a world where speed determines outcomes, speed is survival. Together, these two systems gave animals something genuinely new in the history of life. The ability to carry the past into the present, to let what had already happened change what happened next. Henry Molaison lost that ability for events on the morning of his surgery and never recovered it. He woke up each day without the thread that connects one moment to the next, without the sense of a self that extends through time, a self with a past that explains the present and a present that is moving toward a future. He was, by every account from the researchers who knew him well, a warm and gentle and often funny man. He was not unconscious. He was not without a personality. He was simply living without the thing that most of us never notice we have. Because it is so constant and so pervasive that we cannot imagine its absence. 55 years. Every morning. Arriving again. Every person he had met the day before. A stranger. Every conversation he had yesterday. Gone. He died in 2008. The researchers who had spent decades with him wept. Memory did not begin as identity. It began as survival. It began as the capacity to not die in the same place twice. To not eat the same poison twice. To let the past change the odds of the future. But somewhere in the hundreds of millions of years of refinement, somewhere in the accumulation of what could be stored and retrieved and carried forward, it became something more than that. Something that Henry Molaison spent 55 years living without, and that most of us will spend our entire lives never once thinking about. Something that is, quietly, the material from which a self is made. In the fall of 1848, a 25-year-old foreman named Phineas Gage was supervising a railroad construction crew in Cavendish, Vermont, when an accidental explosion drove an iron tamping rod through his skull. The rod entered below his left cheekbone and exited through the top of his head. It was over an inch in diameter. It weighed more than 13 pounds. It passed completely through his frontal lobe and landed 80 feet away. Phineas Gage did not die. He was conscious within minutes. He spoke to the men who came to help him. He walked to the cart that carried him to a doctor. Within 2 months, he had recovered enough to leave medical care. His memory was intact. His language was intact. His intelligence, by every measure available at the time, appeared unaffected. But the people who knew him said something that researchers would still be quoting 170 years later. Phineas Gage, they said, was no longer Phineas Gage. The man who had been known for his reliability, his even temper, his ability to manage a crew with patience and consistency, had become someone his friends and family barely recognized. Impulsive, unreliable, unable to stick to any plan for more than a few minutes. His doctor, John Harlow, wrote that the equilibrium between his intellectual faculties and his animal propensities seemed to have been destroyed. What the iron rod had taken from Phineas Gage was not his intelligence. It was something the medicine of 1848 had no good name for. Something that sat in the space between thinking and feeling, between knowing what to do and being able to do it. Something that would take another century and a half of neuroscience to begin to understand. It is worth saying, before going further, that the popular story of Phineas Gage has been told and retold until some of the details have grown beyond what the evidence actually supports. Later historians have pointed out that accounts of his transformation were sometimes exaggerated, and that some records suggest he may have recovered more function over time than the dramatic version of the story acknowledges. The case is real. The man was real. But like many famous cases in neuroscience, the legend has sometimes outrun the facts. What the case of Phineas Gage opened, regardless of its particulars, was a question that has never closed. How do emotion, judgment, and personality depend on the structure of the frontal brain? Decades later, a neurologist named Antonio Damasio sat with patients who had damage to parts of the prefrontal cortex that connect to emotional processing systems. And what he found contradicted almost everything the standard model of rational thought predicted. These patients were not more rational than normal people. They were less functional. They could discuss the pros and cons of a decision in exhaustive detail. They could identify every relevant factor, weigh every consideration, articulate the logic of every possible choice with apparent precision, and then they could not decide. Or they decided randomly. Or they made choices that anyone watching them would immediately recognize as terrible. What they had lost was not reasoning. They had lost the ability to attach emotional weight to outcomes. And without emotional weight, reasoning spun in place. Every option felt equivalent. Every path felt as good as every other. The machinery of deliberate thought, operating without the signal that told it what mattered, produced nothing useful. Damasio called this the somatic marker hypothesis, the idea that emotional responses, felt as physical sensations in the body, serve as rapid guides to decision-making. They flag certain options as promising and others as dangerous, before conscious analysis has even begun. The gut feeling, in this account, is not a distraction from good thinking. It is what makes good thinking possible. Now go back further, back past the prefrontal cortex, past the circuits that Gage and Damasio's patients taught us about, back to the ocean. The creatures of the Cambrian seas did not have emotions in any sense you would recognize, but they had the ancestors of emotions. They had approach and avoidance systems, neural circuits that drove movement toward things associated with survival and away from things associated with danger. They had something like pain, signals generated by tissue damage that altered behavior in ways that reduced further damage. They had something like pleasure, reinforcement signals that made behaviors associated with food or safety more likely to be repeated. These are not emotions in the full human sense. They are the simplest building blocks of the systems that would, hundreds of millions of years later, produce what you experience when you lose someone you love, or hold someone you love, or watch something you love end. The line from those primitive circuits to human grief is a long one, but it is a continuous line. Look at what happened when mammals appeared. A reptile, in most species, does not care for its young after hatching. The eggs are laid. The relationship ends there. This is not a moral failing. It is a reproductive strategy that works well enough for cold-blooded animals in stable environments. But mammal infants are born in a state of profound dependence. They cannot regulate their own temperature. They cannot find food. They cannot survive without sustained care. A mammal infant that is abandoned dies. So, evolution, working as it always does through the arithmetic of who survives and who does not, built into the mammalian nervous system something that made abandonment feel wrong, something that made proximity to offspring feel necessary, something that made the distress call of a separated infant impossible for a mother in most mammalian species to ignore. It built attachment, and to make attachment work, it built the neural machinery to feel it. Oxytocin systems that produce the physical experience of warmth in social contact. Stress responses that activate when social bonds are threatened. Circuits that reinforce caregiving behavior, not through logic but through feeling. In 2009, a researcher named Joyce Poole, who had spent decades studying elephants in Kenya, documented an elephant family standing beside the body of a matriarch who had died. They remained there for 3 days. They touched the body repeatedly with their trunks. They stood in what she described as a vigil, the family members taking turns approaching and retreating, some of them staying closer than others, none of them willing to simply walk away. We do not know what an elephant experiences. We cannot access its inner life the way we can access our own. But what Joyce Poole observed that day was the behavior of creatures whose attachment systems, built to keep vulnerable young alive, had extended across decades of social relationship, and were now running in the presence of an absence they did not know how to process. The system was built for survival. What it produces, when it runs in creatures with long memories and deep social bonds, looks like grief. Your grief looks like grief for the same reason. Not because you decided to feel it, not because it is the appropriate or proportionate response, but because the same ancient machinery that made mammalian survival possible is running in you. And when it encounters loss, it does what it was built to do. It holds on. Here is what this means for the picture most of us carry of our own minds. You did not think about someone and then decide to love them. You did not analyze a situation and conclude that fear was the correct response. You did not assess your options and determine that grief was warranted. The emotional response came first, or so quickly before conscious thought, that the sequence is invisible from the inside. What you experience as a feeling is the surface of a process that began in neural systems older than language, older than memory in the conscious sense, older than anything you would call a mind. This does not make emotions irrational. It makes them foundational. Phineas Gage lost the connection between emotion and judgment and became someone his friends did not recognize. Damasio's patients lost the ability to feel the weight of outcomes and lost the ability to function. What each of them lost was access to the ancient systems underneath the modern ones. The systems that evolved not to decorate human experience, but to make it possible. The ones that came first. In 2010, a marine biologist named Jennifer Mather published a paper that included something unusual for a scientific study: a description of individual personalities in octopuses, not behavioral tendencies measured across a population. Personalities. Individual differences in how specific animals responded to novelty, to challenge, to the presence of researchers, to boredom. Some were bold, some were shy, some approached new objects with what the researchers described as apparent curiosity, returning repeatedly to investigate things that posed no threat and offered no food. One animal in the study was described as playful. The paper was careful. As good science is, the researchers used precise behavioral measures. They did not claim that octopuses experience the world the way humans do, but what they documented was difficult to set aside. These were not interchangeable units of behavior. These were individuals, animals that were, in some sense, the language of biology still struggles to fully capture. Someone. The octopus is worth pausing on. The last common ancestor of an octopus and a human being lived more than 500 million years ago. It was almost certainly a small, simple creature with a rudimentary nervous system and no brain worth the name. From that ancestor, two lineages separated and traveled in entirely different directions for more than 500 million years. On one side, the vertebrate line that eventually produced fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and us. On the other side, the mollusks, a group that includes clams and snails and slugs, and, at the far end of its own long journey, the octopus. An octopus brain shares almost no architectural features with a vertebrate brain, where your neurons are organized into layers and regions with specific functions. An octopus nervous system is distributed in ways that still surprise the researchers who study it. Roughly 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are not in its brain at all. They are in its arms. Each arm has enough neural tissue to process information and generate behavior semi-independently. An octopus arm, severed from the body, will continue to reach for food for up to an hour. An octopus, in a very real sense, thinks with its body, and yet An octopus can open a child-proof pill bottle. It can navigate a maze. It can recognize individual human faces and respond differently to people it has had positive versus negative interactions with. It can use tools, carrying coconut shell halves as portable shelters. A researcher at the Seattle Aquarium once reported that one of the octopuses in her care had developed a habit of shooting jets of water at the overhead lighting fixture in its tank, repeatedly and apparently deliberately, until the light short-circuited. Maintenance had to be called 3 times before anyone figured out what was happening. We do not know what was going on in that octopus's mind, or whether mind is even the right word for what it has. What we know is that it had a preference about its lighting, and it acted on that preference with persistence and apparent intention. With a nervous system built on completely different principles from ours, following a completely different evolutionary path, it arrived at behavior that we find, despite ourselves, recognizable. Now consider the corvids. Ravens, crows, and jays are birds, which means their last common ancestor with humans was a reptile that lived more than 300 million years ago. Their brains are structured differently from mammalian brains. The layered cortex that supports complex cognition in mammals does not exist in birds. What birds have instead is a region organized differently, built from different cell types, and yet apparently capable of supporting behavioral complexity that rivals and in some tasks exceeds what primates can do. A raven can plan for the future, setting aside a preferred food item today to use as currency to obtain a better item tomorrow. A New Caledonian crow can bend a wire into a hook to extract food from a crevice, a behavior that no one taught it and that requires understanding the physical properties of the material and the mechanical requirements of the problem. A western scrub jay, if it has been watched by another jay while caching food, will go back and move its hidden food to a new location when the other jay is gone. It understands that the other jay saw where the food was hidden, and it does not trust the jay to leave it alone. That last behavior requires something remarkable. It requires the scrub jay to model the mental state of another animal, to understand that another creature has knowledge, and that knowledge might motivate action. Psychologists have a name for this capacity. They call it theory of mind. And then there is the elephant that Joyce Poole watched standing beside the bones of a matriarch years after that animal had died, touching them again with her trunk. The same bones she had visited before, a place she kept returning to. What these animals share is not a common brain architecture. What they share is a common pressure. The pressure of living in complex environments where success depends on tracking relationships, predicting behavior, remembering history, and coordinating action across time. That pressure, applied to different nervous systems over different evolutionary timescales, has produced something that functions like intelligence in each of them. Not the same intelligence, not intelligence that works the same way, but something that solves similar problems, because the problems themselves are similar. This matters for the story of your brain in a specific way. The temptation, when you trace the evolution of the nervous system from jellyfish nerve nets through fish and reptiles and mammals to humans, is to read it as a story of ascent, a ladder with us at the top, each rung adding something that the rungs below lacked. That reading is wrong, and wrong in ways that matter. Evolution does not build toward anything. The octopus is not a failed primate. The crow is not a proto-human waiting for a cortex. They are the products of their own histories, shaped by their own pressures, carrying in their nervous systems their own answers to their own versions of the same fundamental question. How do you survive in a complex and unpredictable world? Their answers are different from ours, and in being different, they reveal something important about ours. The human brain is not the only possible solution to the problem of intelligence. It is one solution, a particular solution, shaped by particular pressures over a particular span of time. What makes it distinctive is not simply that it is large, or complex, or powerful. Other animals have large and complex and powerful brains, in their own ways. What makes it distinctive is something else, something that none of the animals in this chapter, for all their remarkable capacities, have developed in quite the same way. Something that, when it appeared, changed what was possible for life on Earth in ways that are still unfolding. That is what comes next. There is a game that researchers play with young children to understand something specific about how their minds work. A child watches a researcher place a marble inside a box and close the lid. Then, a second researcher enters the room. While the second researcher watches, the first opens the box, removes the marble, and hides it under a pillow on the other side of the room. The second researcher leaves. Then the child is asked a simple question. When she comes back, where will she look for the marble? Children under roughly 4 years old almost always say the same thing: under the pillow, because that is where the marble is. They know where the marble is, and they cannot yet fully separate what they know from what someone else knows. For them, knowledge is universal. If they know something, everyone knows it. Children over roughly 4 years old answer differently. They say she will look in the box, because that is the last place she saw the marble. They understand that the second researcher has a different set of information, that another person can hold a belief that is false, that minds are separate, each carrying its own picture of the world, and those pictures do not always match. Researchers call this theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have beliefs, desires, intention, and knowledge that differ from your own. The ability to run, inside your own head, a working model of someone else's perspective. It sounds simple when you describe it in terms of a marble and a box. It is anything but simple. To model another person's mental state, you have to simultaneously hold your own perspective and a representation of someone else's. Track the differences between them. Update your model as new information arrives, and use that model to predict what they will do next. You have to do this while managing your own behavior, monitoring the dynamics of the situation you are both in, and keeping track of the history of your relationship with this person and what that history implies about their likely intentions. In most social situations, you are doing this for multiple people at once, and you have been doing it so long that it feels effortless. The way walking feels effortless to someone who learned as a child and has not thought about the mechanics since. Robin Dunbar is a British anthropologist who spent decades studying the relationship between brain size and social complexity in primates. What he found, across dozens of species, was a pattern. Primate species that live in larger social groups tend to have a larger neocortex, the outer layer of the brain associated with complex cognition, relative to the rest of their brain. The pattern holds across species with a consistency that has generated enormous research interest and considerable debate. Scientists have questioned the methods, proposed alternative explanations, pointed out complications in the data. The full picture is more complex than any single study captures. But the core observation, that social complexity is one of the most powerful forces shaping the size and organization of the primate brain, has proven durable across decades of subsequent work. Think about what it actually takes to live successfully in a primate social group. You need to know who is dominant over whom, and dominance hierarchies shift. You need to know who is allied with whom. And alliances form and dissolve based on events you may not have witnessed. You need to know who owes whom a favor, who has cheated whom in the past, and who is likely to cheat again. You need to track the emotional states of the individuals around you well enough to predict their behavior before it happens. You need to manage your own reputation, which means modeling how others perceive you and adjusting your behavior accordingly. You need to identify who is lying, who is concealing their true intentions, and who can be trusted with what. None of this involves finding food, climbing a tree, or escaping a predator. It is entirely a problem of information processing, of building accurate models of other minds and navigating a world that is constantly changing because every mind in it is simultaneously trying to do the same thing. The most demanding environment that primate intelligence ever had to navigate was not the forest. It was the group. And this brings us to something most people feel every day without ever framing it in these terms. You are wired to care deeply about what other people think of you, in ways that can feel, when you examine them in the cold light of deliberate thought, almost irrational. You replay conversations from hours ago, searching for anything that might have landed wrong. You notice when someone does not laugh at something you thought was funny, and the noticing stays with you. You feel a particular discomfort when you sense that someone's stated opinion of you and their actual opinion do not match. This is not vanity. It is not insecurity in the clinical sense. It is the social monitoring system of the primate brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, tracking your position in the social environment with the same vigilance that the threat network monitors the physical environment for danger. Because in the world where this brain was built, your position in the social group determined your access to food, your protection from outside threats, your ability to find a mate, and in many cases your survival. The brain that tracked social standing carefully was the brain that lived. The modern world has changed almost everything about the environment that brain was built for. It has not changed the brain. When you feel the particular anxiety that comes with posting something publicly and then watching to see how people respond, you are running the same social monitoring system your ancestors used to track their position in a group of a few dozen people on the savannah. The scale is different. The stakes are different. The screen in your hand is different. The brain doing the monitoring is the same. And there is one more thing this social brain produced, something that follows almost inevitably from theory of mind. If you can model my mental state, and I know you can model my mental state, then I model your modeling of my mental state. You know I am doing that, and you model that. We are now running models of models of models, several layers deep, in real time, while also talking to each other about something else entirely. This is what a difficult conversation actually involves, what a negotiation involves, what a long marriage involves, what raising a child involves. Because a child's mind is changing so fast that the model you built last month is already partly wrong. It is also at sufficient levels of complexity. What lying involves, what detecting lies involves, what building systems of trust between strangers involves, what imagining how your decisions today will affect people who do not exist yet involves. Every one of those capacities grew from the same root, the need to know what was happening inside another mind before that mind acted. Now consider what happens when the community that this system was built for is absent. In 2023, the United States Surgeon General issued a formal advisory describing loneliness and social isolation as a public health crisis. The report noted that people who are chronically lonely face higher risks of heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression, and anxiety. It noted that the mortality risk associated with chronic loneliness is comparable, in some analyses, to smoking roughly 15 cigarettes a day. This is not metaphor. This is biology. The brain that evolved to track complex social relationships does not simply feel bad when those relationships are absent. It runs stress responses that were designed for physical threat. Because social disconnection, in the environment where the brain was built, was a physical threat. A primate separated from its group was a primate exposed to predators without allies, cut off from resources, vulnerable in ways that the isolated individual almost never survived. The brain that registered social exclusion as dangerous was the brain that motivated behavior to restore social connection. The brain that felt that pain intensely was the brain most likely to act on it. The pain of loneliness is a signal, an ancient warning, telling you, in the clearest language the brain has, that something essential is missing. The fact that the signal sometimes fires in circumstances where what is missing cannot be easily restored. In a world where community has become optional and geographic mobility has scattered the social networks that used to be simply the given condition of a human life, does not mean the signal is broken. It means the environment has changed faster than the brain can follow. The most dangerous environment that the primate brain ever evolved to navigate was another mind. It is still in that environment, every day, and it has never stopped paying attention. A foal drops to the ground from its mother, and within an hour it is standing. Within a few hours it can run. Within days it is keeping pace with the herd. In the grasslands where horses evolved, this was not optional. A foal that could not stand quickly was a foal that did not survive its first night. A human infant is born and cannot hold its own head up. It will spend the next 3 months learning to do that. The next year, learning to sit, crawl, stand, take its first tentative steps. The next several years, learning to run with any reliability. And the capacities we consider most distinctly human. The ability to plan across time, regulate impulse, weigh consequences weeks or months out, will continue developing into the mid-20s. No other large mammal takes this long. This is not an accident, and it is not a failure of design. It is the direct consequence of the most expensive biological investment that evolution has ever made in a single organ. The human brain at birth is, by the standards of nervous system development, profoundly unfinished. The connections between neurons that will eventually support language, reasoning, social intelligence, and everything else that makes a human mind are mostly not yet formed. What is present at birth is the basic architecture, the brainstem, the cerebellum, the subcortical structures that manage heartbeat and breathing, and the most fundamental survival functions. What is absent is the vast majority of the wiring that will make the higher floors of that architecture operational. This unfinished state is not a problem. It is the solution to a different problem. The adult human brain is too large to exit the birth canal fully formed. The pelvis that allows upright walking, itself a relatively recent development in the human lineage, creates a passage with an upper limit on how large a skull can be at birth. The brain that a human adult needs to function in a complex social world exceeds what can fit through that passage in a fully developed state. So evolution did something with no real parallel in the vertebrate world. It delivers the brain early. It sends the infant out while the brain is still in its most rapid phase of development, and lets the remaining growth happen outside the womb. In direct contact with the social and physical environment, the brain will eventually have to navigate. The consequence is the most dependent infancy in the animal kingdom. A human infant left alone does not survive. Not for hours. Not in any environment that natural selection operated in. It cannot regulate its own temperature. It cannot find food. It cannot move away from danger. It cannot do anything that any other mammal can do at the equivalent stage of development. This means that human survival has never, not for a single generation, been an individual project. From the first moment of life, a human being requires other human beings to keep it alive. The social bonds, the caregiving relationships, the attachment systems we examined in the previous chapters are not optional arrangements layered on top of individual survival. They are the mechanism of survival itself. And this is part of why the social brain grew as large as it did, not only because navigating group politics was cognitively demanding, but because the infants most dependent on social support were the ones most likely to survive. The brain built the dependency. The dependency reinforced the brain. One drove the other. Across millions of years of human evolution, now consider the energy. The adult human brain makes up roughly 2% of body weight and consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy at rest. The heart, working continuously, consumes far less per unit of mass. The liver, performing hundreds of metabolic functions, is a much larger organ for comparable energy use. The brain achieves its consumption from a fraction of the body's mass because what it is doing is extraordinarily energetically expensive. Every thought, every perception, every memory consolidated during sleep, every social calculation run when you walk into a room full of people, every prediction your brain generates about what is about to happen runs on glucose and oxygen, delivered through a vascular network that branches into every corner of the brain at a density that has no parallel elsewhere in the body. For most of human evolutionary history, this was not a trivial burden. Calories were not guaranteed. Food had to be found, caught, or grown. A body that invested this heavily in brain tissue needed more fuel than a body that did not. In a world where more fuel was not always available, and yet the brain grew. Fossil skulls tell this story with unusual clarity. The cranial capacity of the earliest members of the genus Homo, roughly 2 million years ago, was somewhere around 600 cubic centimeters, similar to that of a chimpanzee. The cranial capacity of anatomically modern humans is roughly 1,400 cubic centimeters, more than double, across 2 million years of evolution. That expansion did not happen cheaply. Every generation in which a larger brain provided enough of an advantage to offset its costs survived to pass the larger brain on. Every generation in which the costs outweighed the advantages did not, and the costs were paid in specific and consequential ways. Childbirth in humans has been one of the leading causes of death among women throughout recorded history. The passage of a large-skulled infant through a birth canal, constrained by bipedal anatomy, is one of the most physically demanding events in the life of any large mammal. Without surgical intervention, a significant fraction of difficult deliveries in past centuries ended in the death of the mother, the infant, or both. This is not a footnote to the story of human brain evolution. It is one of the prices the species paid for it, generation after generation, in the lives of the people who paid it. The brain did not emerge as a triumph. It emerged as a gamble that what larger and more complex neural tissue provided in social navigation and tool-making and language and planning and the accumulated advantages of culture was worth what it cost. The fact that humans have expanded to nearly every environment on Earth tells you the gamble paid off, but it was still a gamble, and it was paid for, generation after generation, in a currency that was never abstract. It was paid for in lives. sometime around 17,000 years ago, deep in a limestone cave in what is now southwestern France, someone carried a lamp made from animal fat into the darkness. They went far enough in that the entrance disappeared behind them, far enough that the only light was the small flame they carried, throwing orange against the stone, making the walls move. And then they stopped, and they painted. Not a rough mark, not a quick scratch. What they created on those walls, in that darkness, with that small fire, was a horse rendered with enough anatomical understanding and enough skill that when the cave was rediscovered in 1940 by a teenager following his dog through a hole in the ground, the first scientists who examined the paintings questioned whether they could really be that old. The lines were too confident, the proportions too accurate, the sense of movement too alive. The cave is called Lascaux. It contains hundreds of images: aurochs and deer and bison and a rhinoceros and a bear. In one corner, a small human figure with a bird's head, the meaning of which no one has ever satisfactorily explained. The people who made these images lived without writing, without agriculture, without any of the accumulated technology we associate with civilization. They had stone tools and fire and animal skins and each other. And one of them went into the dark with a lamp and painted something that did not need to exist. No one who has stood inside Lascaux or seen photographs of it has failed to feel something specific in response to those images. Something difficult to name but easy to recognize. A sense of contact across an enormous distance. A sense that the person who painted that horse was not so different from you. Not in the ways that matter. Not in the ways the paintings make visible. That feeling is pointing at something real. The brain that painted those horses was, in its fundamental architecture, identical to yours. The same regions, the same basic connectivity, the same underlying structure. 17,000 years is nothing in evolutionary terms. The brain has not changed in any significant way across that span. What changed was what the brain was carrying, what it had accumulated, what it had been given by the generations that came before, and what it was capable of passing to the generations that came after. And the mechanism that made that accumulation possible is language. Every social animal communicates. Bees communicate the location of food through the angle and duration of a waggle dance. Vervet monkeys produce distinct alarm calls for different predators. Chimpanzees use gestures and vocalizations to coordinate activity. Communication, in the broad sense, is ancient and widespread. What human language does that no other communication system does is something more specific. It allows you to talk about things that are not here. Not just the food in front of you, or the predator nearby, or the individual standing beside you. Things that happened yesterday, somewhere else, to someone who is not present. Things that might happen under certain conditions. Things that are purely hypothetical, that you know have not happened and may never happen, but that you want to reason about together. The interior of someone else's mind as you imagine it. Your own interior as you experience it. Things that exist nowhere except in the space between one mind and another. This capacity rests on a structural feature of human language that linguists call recursion. The ability to embed propositions inside other propositions, to build complex meanings from simpler ones, to create sentences of indefinite depth from a finite set of elements. She told me that she knew that I had been there. He believes that she told me that she knew. They all agreed that he believed that she had told me. Each sentence contains the previous one inside it. In principle, this can go as deep as memory allows. And this recursive capacity, humble as it looks in simple examples, is what makes it possible to describe the past to someone who was not there, to construct a shared vision of a possible future, to transmit a lesson learned through painful experience to someone who has not had that experience and need not have it. Before language in the full human sense, knowledge died with the individual who held it. An animal that learned through experience that a particular plant was toxic carried that knowledge in its own behavior. It could influence others through demonstration, through social learning, through example, but it could not convey the why, the how, the under what conditions, the what to watch for. When the animal died, the full depth of what it knew died with it. Language changed this completely. A human who discovered that a particular plant was toxic could describe it accurately enough that others would recognize it, could explain the symptoms in enough detail that others would understand the danger without experiencing it. The knowledge could spread through a group in hours and persist through chains of telling across generations. And crucially, it could be refined. Others could add what they had observed. Someone could propose an explanation. Someone else could test it. The knowledge could grow across multiple minds and multiple lifetimes in a way that no individual brain could accomplish alone. This is what biologists call cumulative culture. Knowledge that builds across generations rather than starting over with each one. And it appears, in the degree to which humans practice it, to be without close parallel in the animal kingdom. Chimpanzees transmit learned behaviors. The specific techniques used to crack nuts or fish for termites vary between populations in ways that look like culture. But chimpanzee technology has not changed significantly across the span of time. Researchers have been observing it. It does not compound. Each generation essentially inherits the same toolkit its parents had. Human culture compounds because language allows the explicit transmission not just of what to do, but why, how, under what conditions, and what to try next. The people who built Lascaux were inheritors of tens of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about how to make pigment, how to read stone surfaces, how to control fire, how to survive in a cold and demanding landscape. None of them invented those things. They inherited them through language, from people they had never met. You are doing the same thing right now. The ideas in this story have ancestors stretching back through generations of scientists and writers and thinkers who tried to understand the brain and put what they found into words. You have access to their thinking, not because you know them, but because language and the writing that extended its reach across time made that access possible. But language did something beyond the transmission of knowledge, something that took longer to recognize and is harder to name. It gave the mind a way to look at itself. When you use language to describe your own experience, something happens that does not happen in the absence of language. You create a representation of your own mental state that you can examine from a slight distance. You can say, I feel this, and the saying of it is different from the feeling of it. It stands apart, available for inspection in a way that the raw feeling is not. You are doing this right now, reading about how the brain processes language while simultaneously noticing something about how your own brain is processing these words, thinking about thinking, and now aware that you are thinking about thinking. And now there is another layer, and the layers can continue. This is recursion applied not to language, but to the mind itself. The same structural feature that allows language to embed propositions inside propositions also allows the mind to turn on itself, to make its own processes the object of its own attention, to ask not just what is happening in the world, but what is happening in here. The crow can plan. The octopus can solve a novel problem. The elephant can return, years later, to the place where someone it knew died. and stand there. But none of them built a word for yesterday, or for tomorrow, or for the feeling of carrying a lamp into a dark cave and wanting, for reasons you may not have been able to explain, to put something on the wall before the darkness closed back in. The person who painted that horse at Lascaux did not leave a name. We do not know anything about the particular life they lived, but they left something that has outlasted every name anyone has ever spoken. They left evidence that they were the kind of creature that needed to leave something behind. That need to record, to communicate, to reach across time toward a mind that does not yet exist and say, I was here. This is what I saw. This is what it was like. Grows directly from language, from the recursive mind that language made possible. A brain that can talk about things that are not here eventually talks about things that have not happened yet, about things that might happen, about what a life is for, and what comes after it ends, and when that conversation begins. The questions that follow are ones that no amount of survival pressure prepared any brain to answer. There is a cave in northern Iraq called Shanidar. In the late 1950s, an archaeologist named Ralph Selecki led an excavation there and found what he had not expected to find. Buried in the cave floor were the remains of several Neanderthals who had died roughly 60,000 years ago. What made the burials unusual was not their age. It was what Selecki found in the soil surrounding one of the skeletons. Concentrations of pollen from at least 8 species of flowering plants, arranged, as he interpreted it, in a way consistent with flowers having been placed around the body. The interpretation has been debated in the decades since. Some researchers have proposed that the pollen arrived through other means, carried by burrowing rodents or blown in by wind. The question is not settled. What is not debated is this: Neanderthals buried their dead, deliberately, across multiple sites, with what appears to be intentional care for the placement of the body. They did not have to do this. No other animal does this. A wolf does not bury its dead. A chimpanzee does not. The biological machinery of survival does not require it. And evolution has never before or since favored behaviors that consume time and energy without a survival benefit. But Neanderthals did it anyway. And so do we. In every human culture for which we have records, in every society that has left any trace, the dead are treated with deliberate attention. The forms vary enormously across time and place. The universality does not. This is a clue about what kind of mind the fully developed human brain produces. Because burial is not a behavior that solves any immediate practical problem. It is a behavior that addresses something else. Something with no parallel anywhere else in the animal kingdom. The knowledge that we will die, not the fear of an immediate threat. That is Cambrian. That runs in fish and frogs, and every creature that has a nervous system and a reason to avoid being eaten. What is different in humans is what the previous chapter made possible. A brain that can model futures it has not yet experienced, that can run time forward in its imagination, will eventually run it forward far enough to see what waits at the end. You did not choose to have this knowledge. It arrived, somewhere in childhood, as a natural consequence of having the kind of mind that can think about the future at all. Once it arrived, it could not be found elsewhere. It became part of the model, part of what the brain carries through every ordinary day. A lion does not lie awake, contemplating its own mortality, not because lions are braver or more accepting of their fate, but because the lion's brain, however sophisticated for the purposes of its own life, does not have the recursive modeling capacity to construct a stable representation of its own future non-existence and hold that representation across time. The lion fears the threat in front of it. The lion does not fear death in the abstract. The human brain does both, and the abstract fear is, in many ways, the harder one to carry. Every human culture that has ever existed has developed some way of living with this knowledge, not ignoring it, which the brain will not permit for long, but addressing it, building a relationship with it. In some cultures, this takes the form of beliefs about what happens after the body ends, about a continuation of some essential thing beyond death. In some, it takes the form of practices designed to leave something behind. Children, works, marks on stone walls in limestone caves. In some, it takes the form of philosophical frameworks designed to make the fact of mortality bearable, or even meaningful. In all cultures, it generates ritual and story and art. The whole range of things that humans do that serve no immediate survival purpose, and yet are found wherever humans are found. Science can trace the neural systems involved in these responses. It can describe the evolutionary pressures that produced a brain capable of generating them. What lies beyond that description? What the responses mean, and whether they point toward anything outside the brain that generates them, is a question that science leaves open. It has been lived with and wrestled with by human beings for as long as human beings have existed. What each person does with it remains, as it has always been, their own. But there is something else the recursive human mind does with the knowledge of its own ending. Something beyond ritual and belief. It worries, not just about death, about everything, about the future in general, about all the ways the future might go wrong, about all the threats and losses and failures that the modeling capacity of the brain can generate and the emotional systems can then respond to as if they were already real. The same capacity that makes long-term planning possible makes long-term dread possible. The brain that can imagine a good future can imagine, with equal vividness and equal emotional force, every way that future might not arrive. And because the threat network does not reliably distinguish between imagined dangers and actual ones, the physiological responses to imagined bad futures can be as intense as the responses to real immediate ones. This is the architecture of the particular suffering that is most distinctly human, not pain, which animals share, not fear of the immediate threat, which every nervous system capable of fear experiences, but the specific misery of lying awake at 3 a.m, turning over scenarios that may never come to pass, in a body running the stress response that was built for a predator in the dark. There is no physical action available for what the 3 a.m. brain generates. The danger does not exist yet and may never exist. It cannot be fought or fled, and so the response runs and finds no resolution and runs again. And then there is the other thing, the thing that emerges when the recursive mind turns not just to the future, but to the deepest questions about existence itself. Why does anything exist? What is a life for? Does it matter that I am here? Given how large the universe is and how brief my time in it will be, these questions do not arise in any other nervous system. They cannot. They require the recursive self-modeling capacity that only full human language makes possible. They require a mind that can step back from its own experience and ask, "What is this?" from outside. A mind that can ask that question is a mind that has done something exhausting and remarkable. It has turned the same modeling capacity that evolved to navigate the physical and social world onto the problem of its own existence. It has made itself the object of its own investigation, and in doing so, it has entered territory for which evolution provided no map, because evolution never needed one. The brain was built to solve problems that have solutions. The awareness of death does not have a solution. The question of meaning does not have a solution in the biological sense. What humans have done with these unsolvable problems across all of recorded history, and presumably long before, is find ways to live in their presence, each person arriving at some answer that is theirs alone, and that must be worked out again by each person who comes after. The cave painters of Lascaux went into the dark and made something beautiful. They went back out into the world and continued the business of surviving, finding food, raising children, doing all the things that the biology of being human requires. We do not know what they believed about what waited after their lives ended. We know only that they felt something strongly enough to carry a lamp into the dark and spend the time and effort to leave a record of it. Something that 17,000 years later, to people who never met them and never will, still matters. That is not survival. It is something the brain arrived at accidentally, as a consequence of becoming powerful enough to model the future and talk about what it found there. Something that every person who has ever lived has had to find their own word for. Go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of this story. Further, 3.5 billion years ago, in an ocean with no color, because nothing alive could see color, a bacterium drifted in the dark. No brain, no nervous system, no awareness of any kind. One of the simplest living things that has ever existed. And yet, it was doing something that, in retrospect, contained the seed of everything that followed. It was detecting a signal from the world around it and changing its behavior in response. Not thinking about the signal, not interpreting it, just responding. Chemistry, producing movement. The world outside, reaching in and changing what happened inside. That is where this story began. Not with intelligence, not with thought, with a bacterium, in the dark, doing the only thing it knew how to do, staying alive. From that point to this one, the distance is almost impossible to hold in mind. 3.5 billion years. Extinctions that erased the vast majority of everything that ever lived. Not once, but repeatedly. Each time, leaving behind a smaller group of survivors who would, in time, fill the emptied world again with new forms, new strategies, new experiments in the problem of surviving. The nerve net appeared somewhere in that span of time, a diffuse web of connected neurons. No center, no hierarchy, just a distributed system that let one part of a body know what was happening to another part. Simple, effective, still running, in some form, in the walls of your gut right now, doing what it has always done, without ever asking your brain for instructions. Then, something opened an eye in the Cambrian seas, and the world became fast, and nothing that had a nervous system was ever the same again. Predators that could see, prey that needed to respond before being seen. The arms race that followed drove the development of centralized nervous systems, of brains capable of integrating information from multiple senses at once, of reflexes fast enough to matter, of something new in the history of life, the capacity to predict what was about to happen, and act on the prediction before the moment arrived. On that foundation, over hundreds of millions of years, everything else was built. The fear system that fires before you know what you are afraid of. The memory system that turned the past into a resource. The emotional systems that made social bonding not just possible but necessary. The social brain that expanded to navigate not just the physical world, but the interior world of other minds. The prefrontal regions that allowed planning across time, and modeling of futures that had not yet arrived. The language systems that made it possible to share a model of the world with another mind, to transmit what one person learned to someone who had not learned it, and to keep that knowledge alive past the death of the person who first held it. And somewhere in all of that, something happened that had no precedent in 4 billion years of life on Earth. The brain turned around and looked at itself, not metaphorically, the same neural machinery that evolved to model the external world, to track predators and food sources and social relationships and possible futures, began to model the thing doing the modeling, began to ask what it was, where it came from, what it meant that it existed at all. You have been doing this throughout the story you just finished, reading about the brain with a brain, using the predictive systems to anticipate where the sentences were going, using the memory systems to hold earlier chapters in relation to later ones, using the emotional systems to feel something about what you were reading, using the social intelligence to model the mind behind the words and decide whether to trust it, the brain examining the brain, the river watching its own current. What 2 centuries of increasingly careful looking has found is that the brain is more layered, more ancien, more strange than anyone who began the project anticipated. What feels from the inside like a unified, coherent self, making decisions and experiencing the world is, from the outside, a collection of systems built at different times for different purposes, running in parallel, sometimes in cooperation and sometimes in tension, producing the experience of being someone through a process that none of those systems individually understands or controls. The fear system does not know about the memory system. The memory system does not know about the predictive modeling happening in the visual cortex. The social monitoring system does not know about the enteric nervous system doing its ancient work in the walls of the gut. They run together. These systems built across hundreds of millions of years of separate evolutionary history. And from their running together, something emerges that none of them contains. Something that can ask what it is. The hard problem of consciousness. The question of why there is subjective experience at all. Why there is something it feels like to be you, rather than simply information processing happening in the dark, remains genuinely open. We know an enormous amount about the architecture of the building. We do not yet know why anyone is home. Honest scientists say so. The project is still underway. But here is what that project has already made clear, and what the story you just finished was trying to show. You are all of this at once. The bacterium responding to chemistry, the jellyfish with its distributed net, the Cambrian animal trying to react before the predator reached it, the mammal that could not put its young down, the social primate tracking alliances in a group, the grieving elephant standing beside familiar bones, the creature that carried a lamp into a dark cave and painted something on the wall. You are all of them, layered, all of their solutions, carried forward into this moment, all of their vulnerabilities, inherited, all of their capacities, yours to use in a world that none of them could have imagined, for purposes that none of them could have conceived. The brain did not evolve to understand itself. It evolved to keep a body alive, that it can now ask what it is, and why it exists, and what any of this is for, is not something evolution aimed at or intended. It is what happened anyway, as the accumulated consequence of systems built for other purposes, running together long enough and complexly enough that something new emerged from the combination. And what you do with that, what questions you carry, what you make with the mind, you have been given by 4 billion years of life learning to survive. What you reach toward in the time you have is the one thing in this entire story that was never decided in advance. It is, in the end, the only thing that was always yours,